You think you live in a free market. You think you choose the brands you buy, the news you read, the politicians you fund, the tech you trust. But what if I told you that almost everything, from the coffee in your hand to the phone in your pocket, is owned, funded, or controlled by three companies you've never voted for, never spoken to, and can't escape? Their names whisper through every quarterly report, every merger, every crisis bailout. BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street. Together, they manage over $25 trillion, more than the GDP of the United States and China combined. They are the hidden empire behind capitalism itself. And as you scroll, shop, or invest, you're already inside their machine. The question isn't if they control the world. It's how long they've been hiding it from you. You wake up. You grab a coffee at Starbucks. You stream music on Spotify. You check your portfolio on your Fidelity app and buy a few Apple shares. Different brands, different industries, different worlds. But trace the ownership filings. BlackRock, top 1 or 2 shareholder in every single one. Vanguard, sitting right beside it. State Street, the quiet third seat at the table. You didn't buy Apple stock. You bought a slice of a company owned by the same firms that own everything else. The illusion of choice is their greatest product. Every brand war, every ad campaign, every competition is just one hand selling to the other. And you're financing both sides. Together, the big three own about 18% of all U.S. public equities. In the S&P 500, they control up to 25%. That means 1/4 of corporate America, from Amazon to Exxon, votes under 3 letterheads. They own 90% of the top 500 companies, including media, Disney, Comcast, Fox; tech, Apple, Google, Microsoft; finance, J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America; pharma, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Moderna; food, PepsiCo, Coca-Cola, McDonald's. The list doesn't stop, it loops. Each quarter, new startups go public, and before the ink dries, BlackRock and Vanguard quietly appear in the top 10 shareholder list. The empire doesn't conquer by invasion. It conquers by index funds. Most investors think of index funds as harmless, a set-and-forget investment. You put your money in an ETF, it tracks the market, and everyone wins. Except that behind the curtain, those shares come with voting rights. When Apple holds its annual shareholder meeting, it isn't your few fractional shares that decide. It's the 8% voting block held by these firms, and they vote as one. They don't just own the companies. They direct them, how they report emissions, which executives stay, which products launch. It's quiet, legal, invisible, and it turns passive investing into active control of the global economy. That's why every major CEO, from Tim Cook to Jamie Dimon, keeps a private line to Larry Fink's office at BlackRock. Because when BlackRock speaks, markets move. Meet the architects. Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock. The man who calls presidents, not the other way around. Mortimer Buckley, Vanguard's quiet chief, successor to Jack Bogle's idealism turned trillion-dollar gatekeeper. Ron O'Hanley, State Street's Boston-bred strategist, the third wheel in the most powerful trio on earth. They don't appear on magazine covers. They appear on policy boards, World Economic Forum panels, and Federal Reserve consultations. Their fingerprints are on everything from ESG mandates to pandemic stimulus programs. And yet, you've probably never heard their voices. That's not by accident. It's by design. Because the less you know about who runs the system, the less you question why it always benefits them. In 2020, when the global economy shut down, something extraordinary happened. While airlines, restaurants, and small businesses collapsed, BlackRock's Aladdin platform, its AI risk management system, was chosen by the U.S. Treasury to help manage the Federal Reserve's bond buying program. Translation: the same company that owns Wall Street was now advising the government on which assets to save. Conflict of interest? They called it stability. Within months, markets rebounded, but not because small investors saved them. Because the very architects of the crisis were hired to rebuild the house they set on fire. They weren't rescuing the system. They were rewiring it. You think their control ends at the stock market. But look deeper. The empire doesn't stop at finance. It bleeds into everything. BlackRock alone advises over 100 governments and central banks. Its risk platform, Aladdin, monitors more than $21 trillion in global assets. nearly half of the entire world's GDP. That means when a country adjusts its pension policy, a corporate bond rate, or even its energy investment strategy, BlackRock already knows. They're not just predicting the future, they're modeling it. Vanguard's reach is different, more quiet, more permanent. Vanguard doesn't just hold stocks, it holds your retirement. 1 out of every 2 Americans with a 401k or IRA has Vanguard managing their savings. Every paycheck you earn feeds the empire. You didn't choose them. They were built into the system before you were even born. Now, visualize the web. At the center, 3 nodes, BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. Connected to them are thousands of companies across every sector. But look closer. These companies also own shares in each other. Pepsi owns Coca-Cola shares through funds. Coke owns Pepsi through another. Apple's pension fund invests in Microsoft. Microsoft's ETFs invest in Apple. The web loops infinitely until the ownership becomes circular, like a hall of mirrors reflecting power back and forth until no single entity is accountable. That's not capitalism. That's feudalism with Wi-Fi. And the 3 lords sitting on top? They don't need to own 100%. They only need enough to steer the ship. When politics and money blend, the line disappears. In Washington, BlackRock's executives rotate through the highest levels of power. Brian Dees, former BlackRock executive, became Biden's economic advisor. Wally Adeyemo, also ex-BlackRock, Deputy Treasury Secretary. Michael Pyle, ex-BlackRock, Chief Economist to the Vice President. This isn't lobbying. It's infiltration. They don't fund politicians. They become them. And once they're in the room, policy follows profit. Environmental standards that look altruistic? ESG funds that claim morality but lock capital into pre-selected firms? Each one designed, approved, and managed by the same hands. Your moral compass was outsourced to a boardroom, and the world applauded. The web doesn't stop at America's borders. In Europe, BlackRock advises the European Central Bank on climate transition finance. In Canada, Vanguard manages entire public pension systems. In Japan, State Street works directly with the Bank of Japan to manage ETF purchases. Their influence is so deep that even nations don't own themselves anymore. When the Bank of Japan buys its own stock ETFs to stabilize markets, who manages them? BlackRock. When the ECB invests in green bonds, who structures the funds? Vanguard. When small governments need to model their financial systems, who lends the software? State Street. They built the architecture of global finance, then quietly charged rent to use it. Here's the part that most viewers miss. These companies don't just own businesses. They own the land, the data, and the debt those businesses depend on. BlackRock is now one of the largest landlords in America, buying entire neighborhoods through shell LLCs. They don't flip houses. They hold them forever. State Street is one of the biggest custodians of data, not social media data, but the raw numbers of every mutual fund, ETF, and corporate filing in existence. And Vanguard. Its structure is unique. It's owned by its own funds, meaning the investors who put their money into Vanguard technically own it. Sounds democratic. But who manages those funds? Vanguard. It's a closed loop, an empire with no emperor, only algorithms and legal structures that protect themselves from scrutiny. You think media is independent? Think again. The same firms own major stakes in Disney, Comcast, Paramount, Fox, and News Corp. That means whether you're watching CNN, Fox News, or CNBC, the message flows through the same filter. Ever noticed how rarely mainstream outlets discuss index fund dominance? Or how quickly they pivot to diversification when asked about BlackRock's influence? Silence isn't coincidence. It's policy. They don't censor. They starve attention, the modern form of control. What isn't discussed might as well not exist. Now imagine a world where every decision, corporate, political, and personal, feeds data back into one system. Your bank transactions, your mortgage, your retirement fund, your news feed, your vote. Each part optimized, monitored, and influenced by one of 3 companies that profit whether you rise or fall. That's not a conspiracy. That's the logical endpoint of consolidation. They've replaced competition with correlation. And once correlation dominates, freedom becomes statistical noise. The beauty of their design is that it doesn't look like a trap. It looks like convenience. You invest in a low-fee index fund because everyone says it's smart. You hold your retirement account there because your employer auto-enrolled you. You use their ETF because it's in every brokerage app by default. One click at a time, you walk willingly into a cage built of liquidity and trust. And every dollar you deposit becomes another thread in their web. You can't short it, you can't vote against it, and you can't withdraw from it without crashing your own portfolio. The brilliance of the trap? It requires no walls, only habit. At the heart of the empire lies a machine, Aladdin. 20,000 servers humming in unmarked data centers, processing the daily movements of the global economy. Every trade, bond yield, and inflation tick feeds its neural core. It doesn't just observe the market, it nudges it. When Aladdin predicts risk, billions of dollars flow instantly in or out of assets. That movement creates the very risk it predicts. It's a feedback loop of control disguised as efficiency. The algorithm doesn't obey human emotion. Humans now obey the algorithm. Markets feel liquid. You can buy or sell instantly. But in reality, most shares sit frozen inside index funds, held not by people, but by structures that never trade. That means true ownership is shrinking. Every crash, every rally, every record high is a smaller group of decision-makers moving ever larger pools of static money. They call it stability. But in any system, too much stability is fragility waiting to break. Now step inside the trap yourself. You log into your retirement portal. You see reassuring green numbers. You don't notice that your 401k provider, your mortgage lender, and your insurance fund are all managed by the same conglomerates. A single policy shift, a new ESG metric, a liquidity freeze, a bond buying program, and your savings, home value, and credit score pivot in the same direction. You think you're diversified. You're actually syndicated. Here's where the evolution begins. The next frontier isn't stocks or housing. It's digital money. Central bank digital currencies promise efficiency and transparency. But who will manage the reserves, custody the data, and build the infrastructure? The same firms already managing global liquidity. Once money itself becomes programmable, the controllers no longer need to own companies. They can own behavior. Spend too fast, invest in the wrong sector, donate to the wrong cause, and algorithms can slow, redirect, or flag your transactions before you even know. The leash tightens, but the collar glows gold. Control has evolved through 3 ages. Industrial ownership, factories, railroads, oil. 2. Financial ownership, stocks, debt, data. 3. Algorithmic ownership, the automation of choice itself. In the first age, you knew your boss. In the second, you knew your bank. In the third, you won't know who decides. Only that your options keep narrowing while your screens keep multiplying. They've moved beyond money. They now manufacture reality. Behind the scenes, regulatory walls that once separated asset managers from insurers, from data firms, from banks, have quietly dissolved. A merger here, a partnership there, a shared data pipeline, until every sector feeds the same triad of custodians. BlackRock runs climate analytics for insurers. State Street provides custody for pension funds. Vanguard supplies ETFs for banks that invest back into BlackRock's holdings. It's a self-funding loop that no antitrust law can easily untangle because, on paper, they're competitors. In practice, they're one organism. Adam Smith's invisible hand once symbolized the market's wisdom. Today, that hand has a face and a boardroom address. 3 signatures determine the direction of trillions. 3 quarterly reports move the global cost of living. 3 men can, with a memo, shift the fate of entire nations. It's not malice. It's momentum. A machine that can't stop compounding power because the system itself rewards it. You wake up in a house whose mortgage is serviced by a bank partially owned by BlackRock. You brew coffee from a company held by Vanguard's Consumer Staples ETF. Your energy bill? Paid to a utility company with State Street among its top shareholders. You scroll through news curated by algorithms trained on platforms owned by their funds. You swipe a card linked to a bank that invests your deposits back into the same networks. Your 401k? A target date fund that automatically buys the same index holdings each month. At every turn, invisible fingers adjust the dials, interest, dividends, valuations. They don't need to see your face. Your data is your face. When your paycheck hits, it flows upward like a tide, distributed through custodians and clearinghouses until it resurfaces as earnings on the balance sheets of the very firms that own the fund your employer uses. No vote. No rebellion. No exit. You live in the house the empire built. You just rent your existence from it. Control doesn't always look like tyranny. It looks like anxiety. A quiet panic humming beneath every market update, every inflation headline. You watch numbers you can't influence, policies you didn't choose, prices you can't predict. And when things collapse, they call it economic cycles. When they rise, they call it market confidence. Either way, the story absolves the storytellers. You blame yourself for not investing early enough, for not saving more, for not understanding ETFs. But how can you outplay a game where the rules shift at the speed of light and the scoreboard is coded by those who built the casino? We've been here before. Different century. Same structure. In the early 1900s, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, and Carnegie ruled the industrial world. Oil, steel, railroads, the arteries of civilization, controlled by a few magnates. They called it the Gilded Age. When public outrage grew, the government broke them apart. Standard Oil, U.S. Steel, the Northern Securities Trust. But breaking the body didn't kill the idea. Ownership simply mutated. The modern trust isn't a company, it's a fund. And you can't break a fund. Because technically, it's your money. That's the genius. They built a monopoly out of your consent. Every empire evolves the same way. First, conquest. Then, consolidation. Then, control disguised as care. Rome built roads for trade and used them to march legions. The British built telegraphs for communication and used them to monitor colonies. Silicon Valley built networks for connection and uses them to map behavior. Now, the financial empire builds index funds for stability and uses them to synchronize obedience. It doesn't need to censor. It just needs to own everything worth speaking through. 2020 showed the fragility. A virus hit. The world stopped. Yet markets soared while millions lost jobs. Why? Because stimulus money flowed not to people, but into markets, through the same custodians managing the crisis response. The system rewarded itself. And in the data centers of New York, London, and Zurich, algorithms celebrated the recovery of numbers detached from human reality. You weren't rescued. The machine was recalibrated. You work harder, but your rent rises faster. You save, but inflation eats your progress. You invest, but the market no longer responds to human logic. This isn't conspiracy, it's consequence. Every decade of deregulation and automation condensed ownership until the concept of competition became marketing theater. And while we debate left versus right, public versus private, freedom versus security, the empire remains apolitical. Because control doesn't care what color the flag is, so long as the dividend arrives on time. Look around your room right now. Every object has a ticker symbol behind it. Every company behind that ticker has an index fund holding. Every fund is managed by the same triad. You are surrounded not by possessions, but by positions. You don't buy from the system. You are the system. You tell yourself you still have choice. You can change banks, switch brokers, vote differently. But each exit is another hallway inside the same house. The indexes follow you. The custodians follow you. Even if you pull your cash out, your rent, your groceries, your utilities still flow through their ledgers. Freedom was never deleted. It was absorbed. The second twist isn't that three firms own the world. It's that you help them. Every autopay, every low-fee fund, every ETF purchase fed the machine because it looked like progress. You didn't hand them power. You delegated it. For convenience, for simplicity, for safety. That's the paradox of modern wealth. The more efficient it becomes, the less you control it. Some economists whisper about the next correction, a $50 trillion bubble in passive assets. If it ever bursts, the same algorithms that built the illusion of stability will accelerate the fall. Liquidity will vanish in seconds. And when the dust settles, the same players will step in to restore order, buying the ruins at a discount again. That's not cynicism. That's pattern recognition. So what can you do? You can learn where your money sleeps at night. You can question why diversification always circles back to the same names. You can refuse to confuse ownership with access. Most of all, you can remember that systems only persist while people forget who built them. Every empire ends the same way. Not with rebellion, but with remembering. Rome fell when its citizens stopped believing in Rome. Monarchies collapsed when the subjects saw the crown as costume. Corporations fade when consumers see through convenience. The hidden empire of finance will collapse not when it's attacked, but when enough people look directly at it and say, "This isn't invisible anymore." Picture the skyline at night. New York, London, Shanghai. Lights blinking across towers owned by funds managed by funds. Now imagine each light connected by a single, pulsing thread. That's the world's circulatory system. But somewhere in that web, one small spark, a person, a question, a refusal, can reroute the current. Because every empire begins with belief. And belief can be withdrawn. If this story shook you, don't just scroll past it. Follow the thread. Research. Ask who really owns what you buy. Because the most dangerous thing about invisible power is how normal it feels once you stop looking for it. And remember, you can't escape a system you don't see. But once you see it, you're already halfway out.